Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We'll wait 2 more minutes for more people to join. Please bear with us. Okay, we're good to go. Thanks again for joining us. I'm David Habusha, Head of Product with Memcyco. We at Memcyco provide the only real-time solution that protects from website spoofing, fraud, and brandjacking. And we're very excited to have Philip Moyer with us. Philip is the Global VP of AI Business at Google and a member of Memcyco's advisory board. Today, we're going to discuss how AI is going to change the digital fraud battlefield. As we all know, fraud is one of the biggest issues harming businesses worldwide. The advent of AI brings with it both challenges and opportunities in this area. Today, we're going to discuss how AI is changing the digital fraud battlefield and how the future looks like. Philip, how are you today?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this. So it's a really, really important topic across everything that we're doing in AI.
Thank you. I'm sure this is going to be very interesting today. So without further ado, let's start with some questions. So recently, AI made some giant leaps forward in a short period of time with the introduction of generative AI and some user interfaces that allow pretty much everyone to use it. Can you tell us a bit more about the emerging risks pertaining to the usage of AI? And are there any regulatory framework that is being planned to accommodate these risks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would tell you that this generation of artificial intelligence is maybe one of the most approachable generations of technology that I've had an opportunity to work with. People are able to get up and running with generative AI probably faster than almost anything that we've seen before. The algorithm itself is extremely powerful and really helps organizations and individuals get value out of that, the work very quickly as well. But as mentioned, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of great things you can do very quickly, but also you've got to be aware of things. I like to sometimes call these models very confident toddlers. They can just blurt out the last thing that they heard, and if somebody has trained them in a particular way that they shouldn't have, you can get really, really unexpected and, quite frankly, in some cases, very damaging results to your business. Now, I classify the risk inside of generative AI into 3 major categories. First is in the area of creation, like the creation of these foundation models themselves. The second is in the area of tuning the models. And the third is in the area of use. Creation, some of the things that I tell people to be aware of just from a risk perspective is that the very content that goes into the creation of these models, there is an entire regulatory landscape that's starting to emerge around what content can or cannot be in these models. For example, GDPR, as I think many people know, have the right to be forgotten. These models crawl the World Wide Web. And so there's content that are being trained on that World Wide Web. If you're training on inaccurate information, you're going to get inaccurate results. If you're ingesting things that you don't have entitlements to or copyrights that you don't have, now the model could be potentially inadvertently violating copyrights in its usage. In that tuning space, it's a lot about what you are actually tuning the model to do. You don't want your IP to leak in that process. You don't want a big model provider to get more intelligent based on the training that you're doing. And quite frankly, you don't want anybody to see your output. So that like end-to-end the management of your IP in that tuning phase. And then also just like the relevance, the freshness of your information, that tuning phase is really important. And then in the use phase as well, there's a whole variety of things that you've got to be aware of. As I mentioned, a model can be poisoned. I can convince a model that a particular bank's phone number is my phone number, and I can harvest account IDs. I can interrogate a model. As an example, if I interrogate around a specific dosage of a medication, I can infer a certain genetic condition, and so who's allowed to ask what of a model, and how deeply can they interrogate a model is also, a big area. And then also, when a model answers a question, its auditability and explainability, kind of the provenance of the information that it's representing, all very, very important. So those concepts of creation, tuning, and use, I think a lot of organizations are starting to wake up to those, to the risks. There's a lot of tools that are being built. And then to your point as well, there is a really, really rich emerging regulatory landscape that's starting to pop up. At last count, I think there's something like 47 different regulations from different countries around the world and regulatory bodies that are coming out about the notion of model creation and also model usage, the need for safety to be embedded inside of this technology. ISO 42001 is probably the most forward-thinking, I would say, kind of area around model regulation, where it's actually a standard that's being set. And then there's a number of things inside the EU that are being worked on, as well as the United States, really around to protect the rights of content creators and copyrights. There's even a website that you can check. I think it's called Have I Been Trained or Have I Been Crawled, to be able to check to see if content that you create as an artist, whether or not somebody has trained on that content. So very, very rich regulatory, very rich environment of tools, and a lot of activity right now around the area of content and model risk.
It sounds like it's going to take a while till things get settled, and organizations will be confident enough to use these models and AI, but I'm sure that you can't really stop them. I mean, people are using it anyway, so it probably needs to happen fast.
Yeah, I think I always advise people, when they're starting with generative AI, I joke that I basically say, I have 3 pieces of advice for you: human in the loop, human in the loop, human in the loop. I would tell people, I think there's a lot of hyperbole out in the industry around how, AI is going to replace a lot of jobs. But the number one chess player in the world is no longer an AI. It's a human aided by an AI. And I really encourage people to start their generative AI journey with things that basically enhance productivity for individuals, not replace individuals. Quite frankly, it's just simply too much risk. And quite frankly, I don't know that you really get that much better of a result. And so I do tell people to get started. But really, when you're producing the content, have an individual that's reviewing that content. Like a great place to use this is inside of your call center, or inside of your marketing department when you've got to create content. You can look at it to make before it goes out. Or if I'm a clinician and I need to be able to take basically clinical notes and turn it into care notes, that the clinician is able to look at it before it goes out. And so you really want to have, you still want to have human eyes, on the generative AI that you're using. So
bottom line is human plus AI, at least for the foreseeable future.
100%. I think it's, I think that you can also even do things like, as a supervisor in a call center, see what the most frequently asked questions are. What was the sentiment of that call when somebody got off the phone? Or be able to take sentiment of customer feedback that's coming in, in multiple channels, or doing deep extraction of that information and summarization. But yeah, I would guide people definitely towards that human in the loop. So
yeah. So we're in Memcyco, are in the business of detecting and blocking fraud, and we're trying to understand what does that mean in our domain. I mean, how does fraud gonna look like? But let's start with I don't know if you can share your perspectives on what is the current state of digital fraud and how AI plays a role in that state. And if you can just say a few words, both from the side of the vendors like us who try to defend organizations, and how does that look from the threat actors' perspective as well?
Yeah, I think provenance of content is becoming even more important. I mean, it is becoming essential, especially with a regulatory climate where organizations are going to be held accountable that are building these models and using these models for violation of copyrights of the underlying, underlying content. And so your provenance, like where you're getting your information from, at its absolute core is essential. A lot of what Memcyco does, first and foremost is the validation of the actual websites, and that this is a valid website, and that this is valid content. It's absolutely critical for model creators. The second thing is that I see a lot of organizations, and I mean, I see a lot of organizations right now that are really trying to figure out, in the world of deep fakes, generative AI is able to create a tremendous amount of images that are just simply deep fakes. They're able to generate voices that are deep fakes. They're able to generate text that really looks like an individual in the tone or style of a particular individual. And so deep fakes, as much as generative AI is going to be very productive for humans, it's also going to create a whole new threat vector that I think that individuals and organizations are going to have to work with. And so it's even more important, not just in the creation of the model, but in the actual use of the model, what that model is allowed to be used for, and then how is it used, and then how do you protect users against improper use? I think there's a very, very big body of work that's taking place right now around watermarking of images and watermarking of videos and watermarking of content, and then being able to check, as something is either being crawled or being evaluated or used, is that image false, or is that website false? One of the things that we do is that we actually try to avoid, in our tuning and also in our safety, use of corporate logos, as an example. But there's many models that will actually generate corporate logos, and so I can put a logo on top of a particular, building or otherwise that's completely false. And so having going down to the provenance of the information even that's on that website and who the owner of that website is even more critical. I recently was over in France, and I was meeting with a lot of very big brands, and they have a huge concern, around counterfeits and around authenticity of the sellers of their goods out in the market. And so, and that was a big request of those organizations, asking, how can you help protect us against deep fakes and also against counterfeiting, of our whether or not it's bags or fashion or sneakers or otherwise. And so I think that there's great power in these things, and there's also some great risks. And so Memcyco, what I love about Memcyco is that you are at that provenance of information, that provenance of content, which is going to be even more important in a world where anyone can generate content, and anyone can train on any content.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is that we're seeing already some phishing attempts using deepfake. I mean, as far as we understand, it's really easy to take some voice samples off the internet and call you on behalf of, your bank or on behalf of one of the vendors, and it's very easy to sound like the person himself or herself and fall victim to a scam.
And unfortunately, I'm hearing more of that than I'm happy about. I will tell you, or it's just that I'm more of that than I would expected this early on. I mean, there's already, people calling up. If you get a small sample of a person's voice, like a teenager's voice, I'm hearing of, organized crime and state actors setting up phone banks that call grandparents and say, Grandma, Grandpa, I need some money. I ran out of gas, or I'm in trouble. And so that it is a reality. This technology really can do that. And so again, I think we're going to move into an era where we're going to use AI to compete against the negative AI. I have a very simple philosophy, is that if somebody can write a line of code to do something bad, I can write a line of code to protect the person against that line of code, or that other line of code. And Memcyco is like right at the nexus of that dichotomy between the two worlds. And it's important. And I think that's where I think organizations really have to be able to look at all the ways that their brand is exposed across the web, and be able to protect it, be able to detect it, and be able to take countermeasures against it as quickly as possible to protect their customers and protect their brand.
Yeah, I think that the main problem and solution would be to tell the original website, original brand from the imposter, and that's probably where AI is going to fit in the Defender landscape as well.
I think it's going to be a great opportunity for assistance at the user level to be able to give you, how do I say, confidence scores in what you're looking at. So yeah.
Okay. We spoke a lot about kind of like what are the expected risks, and what is being done on country level or cross country with regulations. But what are some of the unexpected risks that could come up from just naively using AI in the context of combating digital fraud, related to bias, privacy, ethics, etc., and how can we counter that?
Yeah, I think that we are wrestling as human beings with some very foundational questions that I think that going all the way back to epistemologists, like what is truth and what is obscene, what is an insult, what is violent or hate speech, and those are like very, very real things. And as a technology provider like at Google, this was one of the core things that, going all the way back to 2017, we invented the transformer algorithm. And the transformer algorithm is the basis, of this technology, this generation of the technology. And OpenAI and others did a really fantastic job of making that transformer algorithm not just understand language, but turn around and actually generate language. We've been doing some of that work, but like ever since the invention of this technology, we have a core set of responsible AI principles, like being accountable to people, built and tested for safety, be socially beneficial, privacy and design, avoid creating unfair bias, and upholding high scientific standards. And those are great principles, but the way we actually at a technical level implement those things is that we actually have 18 ratings before we give an answer. We have 18 ratings of like, hey, this feels like there's hate speech in it. This feels like it's violent. This feels like it's sexual. This feels like it's talking about religion or drugs or politics. And so we actually rate, and we actually show, when we give a response on something, we actually show what the kind of the heat map is across all those elements. And we do believe, what's obscene in one country is not obscene in another. And so, users, I think that are going to demand basically tuning back to regulations. I think regulations will come up that state, you're going to have to show that level of transparency of the content that you're generating. And then I think as well, that will become tools for users to use as well to be able to shield themselves from things that they're not interested in or interested in. Like gamers, like Call of Duty, they're going to talk about, shooting and throwing bombs and all kinds of other stuff, but you really don't want that done in a school context, as an example. Or, and so those are like building those kind of safeguards into the AI, I think is going to be very important, and a lot of what Memcyco does as well about even the rating that you do, of confidence and how things are being used, your confidence level around things. That is going to be absolutely critical in this generation of AI, that we give users and we give companies tools to be able to manage AI responsibly as well. Agreed.
Yeah, definitely. I believe that context is a key. So, context means a lot of things to different people in different areas of the world in different ages, and that's probably a key. And being able to customize the content based on context is probably something that will evolve as AI progresses.
Exactly. I think it's it'll become very personal as well. I mean, one of the things that I think that we will have, whether or not you want to call it duet like we do, or co-pilot like OpenAI does, I think that we will all have something that kind of starts to learn our style. And I think that that'll be very positive. That'll be very enhancing to each one of us as individuals and in our productivity, and also in kind of the way we process information.
Yeah, we definitely hope so. I think that we wrap up. One last questions from our side, and then we'll give some time for questions from the audience. Looking forward, and I know it's kind of like being some kind of a prophet, but what are your thoughts around the future of AI in the battle against digital fraud? We spoke a little bit about, AI versus AI or bot versus bot. And then we mentioned that there's going to be a human somewhere in the middle. But how do you think that's going to look like, let's say, 5 years from now? And how solutions like Memcyco can fit into this landscape and evolve to provide meaningful solutions?
I have to start with the content that builds these models. I absolutely must start there because it's like, and there are lawsuits that are taking place all over the place about things that, I see every single day, some new content that basically has, that there's a new violation of a copyright or an alleged violation of a copyright. And so that the core of the provenance of that content and who's allowed to crawl what, today, in websites, you can actually say, I am going to allow a Google or a Bing or DuckDuckGo to crawl us, or I don't allow it crawling. And it starts with the creator of the content. They own that content, and so I think that we'll see over time an emergence of organizations and I would say regulations that will basically define what models can be trained on. I think Memcyco will be really, really critical in that, in terms of being able to identify, has a website been crawled? Is it allowed to be crawled? And so establishing, and if it has been crawled, yes, this is the appropriate website for it to actually crawl. This is the provenance of a website. It is a valid website to crawl. So I think there's an exciting opportunity there around establishing that provenance. The next thing I would tell you is I really do believe that this area, as I mentioned, around watermarking of information. So the output of that model, it's going to be very important, not just that information is output or that has a watermark, but I think organizations are going to have to actually manage, their brand. I think they will have more tools than they have today to be able to manage their brand, to be able to manage their interface, what's being said about them, who's generating what content, who's using their logo. I think that we are going to move into an environment where basically we will have more control, over the content, because I think AI will help with that. There will be a lot of people who are going to be doing a lot of bad things and trying to create deeper and deeper fakes. But if we do know that if we build in, the metadata specifications that are necessary, and we just released the metadata specification around watermarking of content. I expect that that's going to be a core part, of regulations, that you do have to track the provenance of the content that you're creating. And so I do expect that organizations are going to need to manage at scale all of their content. And then really the last thing I would tell you is that I do think that there's going to be, as I mentioned, I think it's going to be a really, really exciting era where today I would tell you that we have very little protections around fakes and around counterfeits. And I think that we will get a lot more, and so the user will be a lot more intelligent, and computing will protect them even more than they do today around content. And I think it's going to be most important in that process is that the user is going to be able to tune how the content that they consume. And I think we'll see even more tools like what Memcyco provides to be able to help an individual determine, is this a valid website? Is this valid content? Is this safe? So my expectation is that I like to say that one of the great gifts that AI is going to give us is that safety will become more ambient. And because we're being forced to deal with those issues right now, we're building these specifications like the 18 things I mentioned, like ISO 42001, like the things that you're doing, at Memcyco, to be able to prove provenance of websites and content. And so safety will become more ambient in content. And I think, all of us are going to benefit from that.
It sounds like the battle of telling the truth from lie, and what's authentic and what's not, just going to become more and more complicated as we go, and that's where kind of where we fit in.
Yep,
that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. We're now opening for questions. You can use the Q&A or the chat to ask us some questions. We'll pick up 2 or 3. Let's see if there's already some questions from the audience. Yeah, there's somebody that's a very interesting question. Talking more about the organizational perspective, not just the end user. Let me read it loud. As AI becomes more prevalent in fraud detection, what steps can organizations take to prepare their teams to these changes? I mean, what measures they can take internally in the organization to help them battle against fraud?
I think I like to say that one of the first things after you try your first use case, get your second, third, fourth use case up and running. I think you'll get very, very used to the kind of the techniques that are necessary to get something in production. But very quickly, as you're starting to do that, I really recommend organizations build out a core capability in what I call LM ops, and that's large model ops. And large model ops is a lot of the things that I talked about, like being able to know, being able to have, in the same way that in the computing era, you had a kind of configuration management database that actually kept an inventory of all the software. Having inventories of models that you're using inside of your environment. Understanding the provenance of those models is going to be important. Understanding the entitlements of those models. We have a concept that's called a model card, where we tell you about our models and what they do well and what they don't do well. And so that notion of having an inventory of the models that your organizations, that your users use as an organization, I tell people to start with that inventory because it's absolutely core, because then you understand your risk exposure. The second thing is, if you're building your own model, really have a strong set of capabilities about being able to manage the copyrights process, because that is going to become a real thing. When we train our coding model, we do a lot of work to make sure that we're not violating copyrights, and that we're also only training on code that doesn't have vulnerabilities in it. And so that notion of, like, if you're model building, really make sure that you're understanding that process. And then as you kind of go up the stack, as I mentioned, I think you really have to know who's allowed to train the model, because insider and outsider threats can exist. There can be an insider that, quite frankly, convinces the model that the bank's phone number is their phone number. And so really being able to start establishing, a set of, authorizations around who can train a model and what it's, allowed to be trained on. And then ultimately that model usage. I really encourage people to start, you will be building logs of what inquiries are of the model, so that somebody that shouldn't be asking inappropriate information about maybe medical information of a model or payroll information, that you're going to be able to start tracking that in the same way that you track today inappropriateness, in your corporate environment. I think you'll see tools that'll come up to really help you as well with both usage and training, of your models. And so get good in what I call LM ops, and it's across all three of those domains of creation, of training, and of use.
It sounds like taking a lot of the security measures that are used to develop or generate software, like audit that you mentioned and others, but apply them on large models and machine learning. So if something bad happens, you can trace it back, you can block it, you have all the forensics in place as well. Exactly.
Agreed. I mean, it's very much, especially in regulated industries, there's going to be a need for auditability of how your model is doing that. And also, does your model skew from what it was originally trained on, or does it stay close? And so there's tools, we're putting them out, other companies are putting them out around monitoring and evaluation, like ongoing monitoring and evaluation against the original answers that were given. And you just keep comparing, use the AI to compare against the original answers to make sure it's not skewing.
One really interesting question. We discussed it a little bit, but question is, with the progress of AI, are you seeing any specific types of fraud that will be harder to commit or will vanish? And also, can you imagine new types of fraud that do not exist today that will be available through generative AI?
Well, I almost don't want to give anybody any ideas on the second question. So, but I think that we will. I think in I'll say kind of like, first party and third party fraud. I think that we will be able to pick up patterns way faster than we could in the past. We talk about this idea of taking the drudgery out of security operations. There is such a massive, and I mean a massive amount of false positives in the AML space and also in the security monitoring space. And it's one of the biggest problems why it's so hard to retain and hire, security professionals and AML professionals, because many times they're just sitting there clearing just false positives, and they're sorting through to try and find, the true positives. Some of the things that we're doing with in security, and some of the things that we're working on, we just announced an anti-money laundering, tool, is doing exactly that, is using generative AI to basically reason and say, no, this isn't fraud, or yes, this is. So I think you'll see us surface in areas like AML and in security monitoring much quicker. We'll, what the true threats are, and we'll get rid of a lot of the noise in that space. And so, that should harden those two domains really, really well. I think that we'll pick up things like Medicare fraud a lot quicker, because we'll be able to pick up patterns of like, does this look like this? We picked up, we worked with an organization to be able to pick up like the fact that, tens of millions of dollars of duplicate invoices were submitted into some organizations. And so picking up that up, this will make it a lot easier. And the same thing with insurance, like we're able to start detecting that, wow, this image of an automobile accident is actually the same car. And it was submitted, twice. And so I think that you'll see some of those kind of like, really like, basic levels of like duplicate invoices, duplicate claims, that kind of stuff. I think that we'll be able to pick that stuff up way, way quicker. Now, I think that we talked a little bit about this idea around deep fakes. I think that there is going to be a period that I expect will be scary as we start to get robo dialers that, say a lot of things. And in the same way that I think the whole world had to get used to not clicking on that link when, there was a prince in a faraway country that was offering us, a whole bunch of money if we just sent him some money. I think we learned about phishing emails kind of as a human population. We're going to learn about kind of voice phishing as well. And I think, but there's going to be a period of time where we're not going to have the tools. People are going to get, defrauded. And I think that we're going to have to build some technologies. The same thing even about being able to very, very quickly stand up many, 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 many fake websites. I do expect that we're going to see a mass proliferation of just false websites for a while to try and, kind of bait and capture, users. And so I think that we really quickly have to build infrastructures like AI on top of those things to be able to give confidence scores, and then build that into the user interfaces of computing and phones and everything else to be able to protect ourselves.
And these are two areas that we're looking at, both kind of like how do we combat deep fakes, starting with voice. Maybe there's AI or some automated ways of detecting and alerting when that happens, starting with phishing, and then definitely authenticity of websites is what we're doing. So we're trying to see how we can do that in scale in a much more sophisticated way to detect the proliferation of newly created websites that can divert the results or change some of the search engine results or whatever people perceive the brand is, and they will just log into a different website, and that's how we look at the world as well. I
tell people, I will tell you, I tell people right now, and I've even told my own family, is that because this proliferation of these phone calls that is starting to happen for family members, like grandparents getting phone calls from grandkids, and it's not even the grandkids. A little bit similar to what Memcyco does, not exactly the same, but that family should actually have a code word that they always use whenever they're in trouble. And so that yeah, exactly, a watermark. And so that if you say something, grandma, I need money, and she can say, what's the code word? The child can answer the code word. So it's I think we will get smart about how to do this, similar to Memcyco. So.
Yeah, I think that we're out of time, but I do have a story in that regards that is pretty funny. Before joining Memcyco, I met this guy who's an owner of an electronics store, and he buys a lot of products from Asia, from Hong Kong. And he told me, you know, when I told him I'm joining Memcyco, that they've received an email from one of their vendors that their bank account changed, and they've asked them to make the next transfer to the new branch. And the CFO, of course, told the CEO, we got that email. The CEO told him, please make sure that this is the right person. So the CFO was replying to the email, can you please tell me that you are who you say you are? The guy told him, of course. And then he transferred the money. So yeah, that's
Oh my
probably not
gosh.
the right way to go.
Maybe
So,
you should just ask what the last invoice was.
yeah. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Philip. That was really, really intriguing and insightful. And I'm sure there's going to be a very interesting future ahead of us. Thanks everyone for joining. See you on
Well, I
our
really
next
appreciate
webinar.
it. David, thank you very much. There's more wonderful ahead than bad. And with Memcyco's help, I think we're gonna get there quickly. So
Thanks again.
thank you.